Welcome to the Hustle and Heal podcast where hustle meets healing. If you've tuned in before, I definitely want to say thank you for coming back. Remember, like, share, subscribe. Send this to a friend. For all my newbies, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Thank you for even giving me 5 seconds of your time, right? So today we're going to have a really good episode. The last few episodes I've been talking about childhood trauma and how it affects your mind and your body. So today I have another trauma coach to come on. We're going to really get deeper into the conversation. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself. Thalea, how are you doing today?
Hi, thank you, Adam, so much for inviting me into your space. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here to share. Like you briefly explained, I am a trauma-informed coach. I help predominantly women, but I help men as well. Just really understand who they are and who I believe God created them to be, and to really go deeper into unpacking generational trauma to find real peace and freedom into becoming who they are meant to be.
Yes, because God has all created us with purpose. He has created us to fulfill a goal. And a lot of the times it's not for us, it's for other people, right? And so when you
Mm-hmm.
thinking about like childhood trauma, and of course, you said that you are primarily women, but I think even for men, and I could be the advocate for men on this side because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's hand in hand, it doesn't really matter the gender. It's childhood trauma. I think we all pretty much have something in some way, shape, or form, right? And so what drove you to this path for yourself?
And so it's funny you asked that question because so much of the work that I do today is stemmed from my own personal testimony, my own personal healing journey. And when I discovered what trauma was, like growing up, I had no idea. I just envisioned or thought trauma was those big things that happen to you, like a big car accident or abuse or something that happens. And then you move on and you know, that's what it is. But then through my studies and through my understanding and going through my own journey, I discovered that trauma is quite layered, right? You get the big T traumas, which is those big things that happen to you. Then you get the everyday traumas, the small things, like for example, like you're not getting picked up from school and waiting, and then that fear comes in, and then every time somebody doesn't pick you up or doesn't show up at the right time that you thought they were going to come, it like triggers something within you. So these small little things that happen on a daily basis that we don't even realize can have traumatizing and lasting effects on our mind and on our bodies. And so the way that I like to describe what trauma is something that happens to you, but then the idea of what traumatization is the effect of those moments that live within you. So even if those big things never happen to you again, you still have almost like a traumatic response to
Mhm.
similar situations that then take you back to that. Maybe it's something that happened in childhood. Maybe it's something that happened later on as you grew up. But it takes you back to that lived experience because your body holds it. If you
Mhm.
haven't processed it, your body will respond to it. So you often feel like, oh, I feel uneasy in the situation, or I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling angry, or all these emotions come up. And sometimes we don't actually know, where is this coming from? Why am I feeling this way in the situation? Our bodies are actually telling us maybe there's something that happened that maybe we subconsciously blocked out. Sometimes we don't even have memories of, but our body knows something within our vicinity or something that's happening. And so what I do through my practice and how I guide my clients is we go back to that. We try to trace back the root of why you're experiencing the symptoms we are feeling on it or experiencing on a daily basis, which can definitely be the depression, the anger, actually not even understanding your emotions, feeling that roller coaster. One day I'm happy, one day I'm low. Sometimes it turns out to be like binge eating, overeating, any sort of addiction. So those are all symptoms generally linked to a traumatic experience that most likely happened at childhood or through the years that you were growing up.
And I think that's very important because a lot of us are walking around with trauma that we have no idea about. And even my own journey, I've been learning that for myself. There was a period of time, feel like I'm at the end of it, but I always felt like people who came in my life will leave at some point, right? But I learned that looking back into my childhood and realizing what happened, I had abandonment issues from things that happened back way when. And so when you thinking about like trauma and how it affects you, how does it affect you spiritually? Because I think when we're looking at like the spiritual, and because that's the foundation of everything, right? And I recently learned through like my research and my studies that traumas, even in your past traumas, and I think traumas can still happen to this day, like even as an adult and everything. How is it affecting your spiritual? Because I feel like it can block your connection with God. It can block how you see Him, especially if you have it from your parents. Because no, He is our Father, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I can relate so much. And thank you for sharing about that abandonment piece, you know. I think that is quite pertinent and very resonant to a lot of people. That's a very strong and big part of my journey too, was understanding that I never grew up with my biological father. And as
Okay.
I grew up, my mom got married when I was like 8. So then I had a stepdad, which I love today, and he is my father. But I thought everything was fine. It was like, okay, cool. Now I've got a father figure in my life, and I just keep going on with life. Everything is fine. Only in my later teens did I discover, like, wow, the remnants and the pain of not knowing that father figure. And then even bringing it back to spirituality. I am Christian, so even like the idea of God the Father, that didn't resonate with me because I couldn't, it
Hmm.
was like you said, it blocks you from receiving or even understanding what that kind of love means because I had no model of that growing up, especially most of your behaviors, your love, your connection starts from a very young age. It starts from when you were born till about 7, right?
Hmm.
That's when you're like those first 7 years of your life is where you learn everything, and then that kind of trickles into your later years. And so when you don't have that primary caregiver of love, of support, of safety in your environment, that then sets the foundation of all the challenges you might figure out or come across later on. And then your body, which I love because our bodies are so wonderfully made to protect us, to keep us safe, to keep us to keep us secure. And the way that our bodies do that may not always be the healthiest things, but when you
Yeah.
understand that your body's only trying to protect you, then you can learn healthier ways to manage the traumatic experiences from your past.
Yeah. And that's like survival mode. Your body's always
Mm-hmm.
in survival mode. And it's crazy you said the first 7 years. It was around 6, 7. I was around 6, 7 when my parents started divorcing. And so that was like my first time seeing
Mm,
like domestic violence, a family splitting up.
mm,
It was crazy.
mm,
And I realized like maybe 2 years ago that I had been in like that fight or flight mode for years. And it affected how I showed up for myself. It affected how I showed up for relationships and even like my kids. And so
mm.
when you're looking at even my spiritual connection with God, it was one of those things that was blocked. And so that's why I always feel like this is a really important piece. Right. And so for you, what is a step for somebody who's just now discovering like, man, I have something wrong. How can I start and get past this?
Yeah. I think the most overwhelming part of the journey is the start, right? When we start everything, it can be scary. We don't know where to go. We don't know what's going on. Immediately, you just think, what's wrong with me? Something's wrong with me. And I just want to share, at whatever stage you are in your healing journey, is to just have so much love and compassion for where you are. Right? Because all the things that happen through your upbringing, through life, through the trials that we go through, happened to you, not because you were a bad person. It's just life. We are told we're going to have challenges in this life, but what happens as a young child, we don't have the vocabulary to understand what is happening, right? So most of the time, the meaning we make of every situation, it's my fault. And so then we tend to blame ourselves. So if I take you, for example, and thank you for sharing, like at the young age of 6 and 7, watching your family break up and, all of the things that you were witnessing at that age, because you don't know what's happening and you can't understand it from an adult's lens, at that time you start to be like, okay, I'm the problem. What is wrong with me? Why is my family fighting? Why are they not together? And then we in turn take the generational trauma of it all and then we put it on ourselves. And then we grow up with the identity that we are the problem and we have to try and keep everything together because people always leave, or whatever the narrative is that we make of that in that moment. And then later on, when you have understanding of what's happening, and that's why I love the work that I do so much, is because so much of it is just giving people language, giving them understanding, giving them deeper meaning of like, oh, that makes sense now. So what happened to me when I was this young wasn't my fault. I thought I needed to keep mommy and daddy happy. I thought I had to be the one that,
Right.
looks for approval in everything. So because if I am the good person, then they'll be happy, and then we turn
Yeah.
because as a child, we're selfish. We don't know anything else. We're all about survival in that moment. Mom and dad has to keep us alive. So we are going to do anything in our power to keep their attention on us, and that's how
Right.
it goes. Yeah. Hope that
Ah,
answered the
that actually
question.
does make sense. That does make sense though, because I can, even now, just in this conversation, just listening to what you were saying, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see that for myself actually.
Mm.
But so, what are some like spiritual practices or steps, or even say mental practices that somebody can just do on a daily, a habit that they can have to help just help it easier and make it go? Because, like you said, you don't know as a kid. And I was actually just listening to something before we started, and they said you have to give yourself grace. God is all
Yeah.
about grace and love, right? And so, give yourself that, especially your younger self and even your
Mm.
current self, because if you don't know, how can you fix it, right?
Yeah.
So it is
Absolutely.
that seeking out. But what are some habits or some things that helped you keep going?
A very important tool that I learned through this was just understanding emotions, right? Because sometimes when we have these visceral feelings, these overwhelming thoughts, these moments of anxiety or whatever they are, a really powerful tool that I teach all my clients, and this was really profound in my journey, was under observing what's happening versus identifying. So
Mm,
and we hear this all the time, like, oh, I'm just anxious. Oh, I'm depressed. We need to realize how powerful our language is, right? We
you're
speak
right.
life and death into any situation. And if you're constantly telling yourself, I'm anxious, I'm angry, bad things happen to me all the time, what do you think you're going to see? That's all you're going to see. That's all you're going to become. And so
Like those things.
a really powerful thing is there is no bad emotion. Our emotions are just signals telling us that either we need to pause, we need to slow
Hmm.
down, we need to feel. And because we get so overwhelmed by our emotions, we don't feel. So we kind of like suppress them, and so then the symptoms of addiction and binging and all of these things, because we don't want to feel. And so when we
Hmm.
just take the labeling away, nothing is bad. Just notice when I'm in certain situations, I feel moments, even just saying, I feel moments of anxiety, or I'm
Hmm.
experiencing a moment of anxiety. In that languaging alone, you're creating separation from yourself and the felt experience. So I'm allowed in any moment to feel moments of anger. This really angers me in this moment. I'm not
Hmm.
angry. This moment or the situation is bringing up this feeling of anger. Another situation, somebody hurts you, you feel really sad, you feel betrayed, brings up a emotion of sadness. I'm not a sad person. This experience brought up a moment of sadness. So just listening and observing the different emotions, because we feel all of them 24/7, all times of days. Just
Right.
pausing, not getting attached to it, not reacting, just noticing. And this takes practice because we are so, in our microwave culture, everything is fast paced. To pause, to take a few deep breaths, tune in with your body, notice, oh, my blood is boiling now. I'm really angry because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, how do I want to express this right now? How can I do this in a healthy way? And especially around the emotion of anger. And I want to bring this up because I feel like anger is just, it's such a beautiful emotion that's got a bad reputation because people don't know
I
what
can
anger.
agree.
Yeah, people get confused with aggression and anger. Two very different emotions, right? Maybe comes from the same place, but it's two different things. So anger is just a feeling. Okay, my blood's boiling. I'm feeling rage. I'm feeling, anger towards something. But then when we don't process it, or we don't even acknowledge that I'm feeling it, it turns to aggression. And majority of us have never seen anger being beautifully or healthily expressed. We've seen aggression.
Oh.
So every time we get triggered by anger, immediate
Hmm.
mind goes to violence. Someone's
Hmm.
triggered by something bad's going to happen. So what do? We avoid feeling it because we're scared we're going to see red and then just rage out, right? Or we've witnessed that in our lifetime. We see it all the time. It's portrayed on movies all the time, the anger, the violence, all of those things on the news everywhere. And so, why I love anger so much is because I believe every single person on this planet, if you are being angered by something, it's because you're deeply passionate about something. You
Hmm.
don't get angry or worked up to that point if you don't care about something or you don't want to like fight for something. And so it's all about now acknowledging, okay, why is this situation angering me so much? Oh, because maybe it's something of injustice or women's rights or men's rights or whatever the topic is, or violence, whatever it is. Tune into that and be like, okay, how do I now express this in a healthier way versus me now being aggressive and taking it out and lashing out on people, places, and things? Right? Because, I mean, how many times do we come home, stub our toe against a couch, and the couch gets the wrath of 10 years of suppressed anger, or the dog or the cat,
Right. And I think that's important too, because especially as men, like we were taught to kind of suppress our feelings and just keep going because it's going to hurt. But there is a beauty in actually processing your emotions and actually sitting down into it and feeling it. I think even like that little small practice has helped me deal with a lot of situations, because after you acknowledge it and you feel it where it's in your body, it's like, okay, I'm angry, but I'm not like super angry, but I'm still calm enough to deal with it. And I don't like how this feels. So let me fix it. Right. And so it's hard for a lot of us, and I think as humans we don't want to acknowledge it because I don't want to feel bad. I want to feel good all the time, right? And it is
Absolutely.
those a lot of our emotions are natural. We have to, like you said, we have to change the lens on it and see how we look at it. Because sadness, you want something, you don't like how it's going. Anger is something that's making you mad because it's not going the way that you want it to go, or something happened that's just like flared up something, right? And so when we're looking at emotions and how that affects your mental and that in your physical and your spiritual, what would be the best route for somebody who's just getting started to like just really acknowledge those instead of breath
Mm.
work? Like something like, can they write, journal, what are some
Yes.
things like that?
A beautiful tool is journaling, is really getting comfortable with yourself in your emotion, right? Because so much of it, and maybe for our own safety and our protective mechanisms, when we trigger and stuff, we run away from it because it's not safe. And so I'd love to start with the practice and the practice of safety. So for me, when I understood when I thought of the term safety, I always thought of like external safety, like I need to be safe in my environment, I need to be safe in my neighborhood, be safe in my house. And then the concept of being safe in your body. So much of us are not, so many of us are not safe in our bodies, right? And so that's why we spend so much time in our mental, because we try to think our way out of situations, we overanalyze things. That's why we end up turning into all these anxious thoughts, and then we go into depressive moments and whatever. It's because we don't feel safe. And again, so it's about finding a safe space, finding your safe space. So whether that is a small little corner in your house somewhere, maybe that's in your car. I always feel very safe in my car when I can just go for a drive and just be with myself, or find a space where you feel safe, where you can connect to yourself. And maybe that's out in nature, or just a place where you find like, this is my space. And in that space, go there, just make it your safety sanctuary. And then take out your journal. If you are Christian and you want to dive deep, go open the Bible. There's so many verses around anxiety, around all of these emotional things that we can just turn to in those moments where we can learn to be safe with ourselves and safe with our emotions. And so most of the time we try to manage other people, and we try to manage other people's emotions, and it's so difficult to do when you can't even sit and be still with your own self.
So you have to trust yourself first before you can really
Yeah.
deal with anybody else and pour into your own cup. I know, like one of the things that you said was nature. That's my favorite place to go. A lot of
Yeah, mine
people,
too.
I talk about it a lot because I think I was actually on a coaching call with a bunch of other coaches, and we were kind of just talking through things. And I realized that a lot of people see people as who sit in the nature and just journal and read as weirdos. And so we had a running joke on the call, like, "Hey, we're all weirdos," but you could also tell that everybody had that foundation of, oh, let me go sit in the grass and let me hug a tree because I feel better. I feel grounded. That is my safe space, right? And if we think about it, God made that for that reason, right? Like we're plants. We like to be grounded in areas, and I forgot what scripture it is, but being planted like a tree next to still waters, right? And so, like, even yesterday, I did that. I was having a moment. I was like, I want to feel this. Let me go to my safe space and I'll process it, right? And actually think it through.
Absolutely.
And that was something that really helped me get through that moment in that time, right? So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was saying I'm so proud of you for even doing that, because those moments can creep on us in such a sneaky way that you don't even realize you're in it. And so again, another tool is that slowing down, because we
Mhm.
are in such a fast-paced society. Everything is so fast-paced that when we learn to tune into our emotions, tune into our bodies, we learn to slow down and catch it before it catches us.
Yeah. Because if you allow it to grow, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger
Mm-hmm.
and bigger. And then that's why you get the crash out. And then you look back and you're like, oh
Yep.
man, I didn't really have to react like that. I had a lot of moments like that in my life. I look back on, I'm just like, okay. But I also have to say too, like when we looking at like our lives and how we failed at some things, well, I'll say failed at some things. there's really lessons in every situation. We look back at like how our emotions and things cause us to have a certain reaction that wasn't deemed, wasn't really needed for that moment. But when you look back on it, you're like, okay, I could have reacted differently. So it's that
Mm-hmm.
reflection piece that also helps with this as well.
Exactly. And that's where grace comes in. Because when we were, crashing out, having that meltdown, whatever it was, we didn't perhaps have the tools that we needed during that time. And so we only act out of what we know in those moments. And so now, with hindsight and reflection, you can go back and be like, wow, how could I have handled that situation differently? And when certain situations come up again, as they will, because situations and environments and circumstances don't change, you change, because you will show up differently in those situations, right? And that is the mark of growth. And so much of this work, it's like, you just want the results, you want the quick fix, you want, this is long-term work, because there is no
Hmm.
end, to the healing. It's not linear. It's not, yes, there's a process to it, but it's going to continue. But as you just diligently show up, do the tools, prepare yourself with your toolbox, so that if one tool doesn't work, okay, cool, I can try something else. And as you gradually start to build that resilience, you then start to notice how you change in situations, how you react less. That is the true growth right there, that you react differently, that you show up differently. And through doing that, like you said, we are plants, we are grounded. Once we start doing that, you start to change your environment. And this is the most miraculous thing. And I think this is God in its truest form, is the transforming of the mind and the transforming of how you show up in those situations. Because as you
Hmm.
do that, you're not only doing that for yourself, you're doing that for the people around you. Because now you're
Hmm.
also teaching them how to treat you in certain situations. You then learn to instill boundaries in difficult situations. And as you continue to ground yourself in your authenticity, in that truth, the people around you will start to change. Not because you're telling them this is what's wrong with you and this is what you need to do, but because they see how you have influenced the situation and they learn from your behavior. And that's the best way to teach anyone, is through lived experience and your action. Be love in action, and those are the ways to do it. It's sometimes the toughest things to do, but it's the most rewarding when you stick to it. Because I've seen it evidence in my life, yeah, and in my clients, for sure.
It reminds me of Romans 12:2, where it says, "Be transformed by the renewing of the mind." Sorry, I'm a little Bible illiterate. There's some verses that I remember, but there's some I'm like, I know what it says, but I don't know where it's at. But that was one of the ones I remember, and because it's been coming up for me lately. And for me, it was like, you have to do this every day, literally
Mm,
every day, and show up for yourself every day. And like you said, a lot of people, we look for the progress. Like, okay, I've been doing this for
mm,
like 2 days. Let me, like, how do I
mm,
feel now? And actually, it was crazy. I just found out last Tuesday, because I've been showing up to the gym consistently. I've been the one who never looks at the scale because I really didn't
mhm.
care. It was more so just about being healthier, right? And I learned that I lost 30 pounds. I don't know what the time span was. I don't know anything. I just know I stepped on the scale for the first time in months, and it was like 30 pounds lighter. And I was like, whoa. But it was because I
Wow.
kept showing up for myself and getting there every morning. Like, people will look at me like, you get up at 4 a.m. and go to the gym? Like, absolutely. Because if I don't get up, then I'm not going to do it. So I have to,
Mhm.
it's moments of, even if you don't want to, show up, right? Show up, show up,
Absolutely.
show up, and be consistent with yourself. But I do want to go back to when you were talking about, like, growing up with not your father, it's your biological.
Mm, mm.
For a child, how did that affect you? Because there's a lot of people who are walking around like didn't really have their biological father. And I say, step parents, congrats, applause
Yeah.
to you for stepping up. But there's nothing like that actual biological parent, because I think it's deeper than just, oh, I stepped up to take care of you. There's that spiritual, like, I remember seeing my kids come out and I'm like, whoa, like, my life changed.
Mm.
It hits you deeper than just stepping up for a child. So for you growing up in that space, and I grew up with a step parent as well. What was that like for you?
Yeah. I think because at such a young age, obviously I didn't know, like I said, we don't know these traumatic experiences and the effects of it only much later on, because you just think it's normal and this is just how you go on. Because I still had connection with my biological father's family. I just had no connection with him. That I kind of still felt like I was connected to him in a certain way. So I knew where I came from, and there wasn't ever a question of like my identity or family. All of those kind of questions never ever came to me. But later on, when I started recognizing my patterns and my protective mechanisms and self-sabotaging ways in relationships, I realized that there was that disconnect of knowing what a healthy or a good relationship with a man looks like. And I started seeing how that played out in my romantic relationships and partnerships. And I realized how I had normalize people leaving me because I had that abandonment wound. And it's so crazy. It's like the things that is your biggest fear or your wounds, how if you don't address it, it shows up constantly. It takes over your entire life. And this is all happening on such a subconscious level because you normalize the pain, you normalize the fear. So for so long, I normalized like, this is just life. People leave me, it's fine. I even created my life. This was crazy when I put the pieces together. I ended up leaving South Africa where I was born and bred. And I moved to China and I moved to South Korea for a while. And
Nice.
I lived abroad for about 6 years. And when I lived this nomadic lifestyle, I curated a lifestyle where people leave constantly, come and
Mhm.
go. It's the expat way. It's like you make friends for a little bit, even with friendships, friends for a year, then new people come, new people go. And I normalized my pain. Only until I started doing the work and digging deep, I was like, wow, I normalized people leaving me all the time without realizing that that was me, like manifesting a wound in my life. I was living out of pain that I normalized the pain so that I didn't feel it anymore. And this all happened so subconsciously. It wasn't until I started to unpack, where does this come from? Why do I do this to myself? When I realized, and I went back and I realized, wow, it's that deep childhood trauma of not knowing my father, him leaving me believing that I was the mistake or I was a problem, that he didn't stay. And so in every relationship I had since then was people always left me and then come back to me, then telling myself like, oh, I'm the problem. I'm the, like, there's something wrong with me. And that was the narrative I lived with until I started to be like, no, I actually need to address this. I need to process this. And going through, I think that was the most transformational part of my journey, was dealing with that specific primary wound there of the father wound. And I will never forget, I was in church one day and I was going through all of this healing work and I was really just grappling with, what does this look like? How do I get past this? How do I forgive? How do I not sit in this and sabotage my life? And forgiveness was the biggest piece of the puzzle. And it's such a key piece in the healing journey, is not living with resentment and not holding on to the pain and wearing the pain as your badge. Because a lot of people's like, oh no, I'm a victim of X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to wear this proudly. But instead of being like, this happened to me, I couldn't change it, but I'm going to rise above it. I'm not going to walk around and be like, this is my story. I'm going to walk around being like, this was my story and this is the victory that's come from the story. The really coming back to myself and realizing all those lies that I was believing wasn't true. And
Mhm.
like I said, like coming back and then understanding that I needed to forgive myself for holding on to those lies. I
Mhm.
needed to forgive my father, that I have no relationship with him. I never had a single conversation with him in my life. I know that he lives in a different country and has a family of his own. And I had that moment where I could fully pray and release. And I remember a certain prayer that I prayed, and it was, Lord, bless him that he can be the father for his kids that he couldn't be for me. And praying that prayer set me free. Because for all the
Mm.
years I was, why questioning what's wrong with me. And I realized him leaving me, maybe that was the best thing that he could do for me. Maybe you couldn't show up as the man that he needed to be for me. Whatever that was, however that looked like, that is not a me thing. I needed to release that and say that prayer, and that really set me free. And then walking in that freedom allowed me actually to open up my heart to receive my stepfather as my father, because there was a block. There was like, there's a
Right.
friendship here, there's a mentorship here, there's a nurturing here, but I could never fully accept that you are my father, because I didn't even realize I had this blockage around my heart around it. And so
Mm.
that moment of forgiveness and stepping into freedom actually unlocked a piece of my heart to receive and heal that love that was always there. I just needed to be open to receive it. Yeah.
Wow. I love that because we don't realize how much forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for yourself, and how much healing comes with that. And that was something I struggled with for a while too. It was like, how do I
Mm,
forgive everything I went through? And I had to realize like it's not my fault. Even just, I think is there's, if you are able to have a conversation with the people who hurt you and the people who caused the trauma, like you start to learn things, and then after you learn like what they've been through and how they learn,
hmm.
especially like when we were coming up, a lot of people didn't know, right? And what you don't know, you can't
Yep.
fix. And so like even with me talking to my parents, I learned like, man, like you really didn't know. So it's not your fault. It's your fault, but it's not your fault. But I have to
Mm,
forgive you in order for me to move on. And so when we're looking at like a lot of the things that we learn from our parents, a lot of the things that we learn from school, like our friends and things, and how it impacts us throughout our entire lives. So I would say for you specifically, sorry, I'm losing my question for a second, but how have you shown up for, because like you said, you go through things and I realized that God will put you through something just for a testimony for somebody else to change somebody else's lives. Right. And so you working with women and some men, as you said earlier, how is your story and your testimony changing lives?
it really has. And it's so when you realize, and again, we never really fully realize it in the moment because it's so painful. But then the beauty of the hindsight and looking back and realizing, oh, that's exactly why I went through this. And so even me sharing that story of how I am still in the process of it, I'm not perfect, but like that initial big catalyst of me healing that father wound and releasing that narrative and that story of I'm the problem, I'm the mistake, I shouldn't have been here, whatever the lies I was telling myself and the story I was believing at the time, even just sharing that. And I've seen a lot of my clients also come to me with really like some strong father wounds and mother wounds, lots of toxic family cycles and coming in and just sharing that story of how I didn't go out. My initial initiation into the healing journey was to set myself free. You start off with self and then you realize the self turns into the we. And as we walk, because we are made for community. And as I shared that, I realized that, wow, so much when I went into this, I thought I was just looking after myself. And through that, and showing how I could heal my nuclear family. And again, through trial and error and showing up in the consistency of it all, how that impacted my family cycle. And I realized if I was so drawn to do this work to heal whatever I was going through, and then the greater family cycle. And then I realized like I so deeply want to go out there and change the world and help everybody else. But if I can't do this within my own family, then what is the whole point of going on this like global stage and trying to help the world and you can't even help your own people or the people
Right.
that's supposed to be nearest and dearest to you? And so I've seen such tremendous changes in my clients as well as in my family, which has been so beautiful to see, like having the deeper conversations with my parents now and learning from them and understanding what they went through and how, as we navigate life now, how we don't want to carry those things.
Hmm.
And, onto the next generation, my sister's having a second baby. And so we have like, a next generation of kids coming into the family cycle and how we want to have these conversations. I swear, as a child, we would never sit around the table and talk about, how was your day and how are you feeling and what are you doing? And like to see us have those conversations now is mind blowing. And
Mm.
something really profound that happened with my mom and I, because she was a single parent for majority of my early childhood, she learned to just hustle. She learned to do it all. She had to do it all, right? And through watching her being the strong matriarch mother figure, even my grandmother the same, I learned that. I learned we don't cry, we have to just keep it together, do everything, keep going, keep going, keep going until you break and burn out.
Mhm.
And I've witnessed her burn out in so many ways. And she came to me a couple of years ago and she was like, you know what, since I came back and I, been the weirdo in the family, sitting outside, feet in the grass, reading, journaling, all the things. Um, she came to me and she said to me, she's like, I'm so proud of your journey. And I'm so proud that you taught me that I have the power of choice, because my whole life I went just going, 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 thinking I didn't have a choice. And now I can sit back and I can choose something different. I can do fun things. I don't have to just have my head in the ground and just hustle constantly
Right.
and make sure that everything is taken care of. I can also be me. And for
Mm.
me, it's like it's those little conversations, it's those little breakthroughs that may not be the big things, it may not be the $1 million clients and the notoriety and all the things. But for me, it's like just remembering it's about one life. It's about the one
Mhm.
impact you make. It's about the one mind shift change, or the giving someone vocabulary for something that they've been struggling with their whole life and thought they were the problem, or they're broken, or there's something wrong with them, and they're like, this is actually normal. Yes. You
Right.
know? So again, it comes down to, as you beautifully shared, consistency. It's about showing up, learning how to do things differently, and turning your back against all the naysayers, because you're going to get people that's going to think you're crazy.
You always start off looking like the weirdo. If you
Mm,
really research like the people who kind of like anybody who's really come up. At
mm.
first, they were the weirdos. Like everybody was like, "What are you talking about? That would never work." Closing the door in the face, and then it started to work, and then people started to believe in the impact. So, would you say that as you're doing the work, do you feel like that's also helping you with like your process and also healing yourself?
Yeah. I feel like we're all mirrors for each other in friendships, in relationships, in client, mentor situations, coach situations, just in everyday life. There's so much to learn. And I think something important that anybody listening can take from this is to have an open mind, to have that
Hmm.
growth mindset. Like, you will never know it all, and that's okay. But always be
Right.
open to learn more. You know, check your circles. Make sure that you're not the smartest person in the room, because we are the sum of the five people we end up hanging around with. So always put yourself in spaces where you can grow, where you can stay curious, stay open. There's many different ways to do things, but when you get locked down and taught that there's only one way, you can get so closed minded, your heart can close, you lack the empathy, you lack the grace for others, because everybody's got such a beautiful story to share, and we can learn so many things from everyone's pains and their victories.
Because we all, I think everybody, and now I'm at this place where I sit in a room sometimes quietly, and I watch how everybody's just on their phones like this.
Hmm.
And I'm like, we're all trying to avoid something, right? And we've all been through something. And I think that's why it's important to have that community, like you said, and actually have somebody that you can talk to. Because if you go to like, I've been hearing a lot of people traveling to like Africa and like
Mm-hmm.
other areas, and they're noticing like, okay, there's these people that I'm visiting, they're not on their phones or watching TV all day. They're actually connecting with each other. They're actually talking with each other. And I think some of the best times, I don't even like watching TV anymore. I used to. I was used to sit there and watch TV for hours. And now
Mm-hmm.
you could maybe get an hour out of me, depending on what it is. But I find better healing and better activity just being around people and learning and talking, because you never know what somebody's going through unless you're talking to them. And you might have something that can help them. And I believe that God didn't put us here to just be in our own little bubbles. Because if that was the truth, he wouldn't have gave Adam Eve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're supposed to help each other and we're supposed to grow, but first you have to start with yourself. Because if how can you help somebody if you're still hurting, if you still don't have that help? But that's the importance of mentorship, as you say, or even just getting a coach. But I definitely, in closing, wanted to thank you for coming on. I really did enjoy this episode, this conversation, because for me, I've even got to process some things, just cover a basic conversation. And that's why I started the podcast. I was like, I'm having these conversations, but let's put it out there because somebody may not know who to go talk to for those conversations, but they can at least listen in. So welcome to being a fly on the wall, right?
Yes.
Thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We'll answer them. Like, share, subscribe, send this to a friend, and do that in our work. But before we get go, I want to ask you one question. I want to start this segment called the Hustle and Heal Moment, right? And in this segment, it's where I want to give the audience something to do this week to help start their process. But for you to be a guest on the show, I want you to give it to them. So, what would be
Amazing.
a activity or a challenge that you want to give to my audience this week?
All right. So we touched on a few things in this as we were talking. And as you were saying, just sitting on your phone, like, it's the easiest thing to just distract, numb, run away from something. So the challenge for this week, it would be to just actually notice when you run to your phone and ask yourself a
Mhm.
simple question. What am I avoiding, or what don't I want to feel? So what am I
Mm,
using my phone to distract me from? That's the
mm.
simple thing. because most of the time it will probably be like, maybe it's even, I heard somebody talk about this the other day, where it's like we don't even know how to stand in a line and wait for something without just looking at your phone. Like, when
That's
last did you
true.
sit in a waiting room and just actually, like, maybe ask somebody how was their day? Or we just,
Right.
everyone's just on the phone, like, it's just this constant thing. And so maybe it's like, notice what you're trying to avoid by going to your phone. And if you outdoors and walking around, give somebody a smile. You never know what they're going through, and a smile can really just lighten up someone's day.
It can. There are some days that I walked around kind of like, but I
Mm.
walk around my neighborhood with my dog, and he was like, "Hi." I'm just like, "Oh, hi." I'm like, "Oh, wait, that changed me." Right?
It really
But
does. It gets to be
you
that
know,
simple.
simple, simple. You never know. But I also want to add to that. Write it down, journal it.
Mm,
Make sure
mm.
that you're writing every day. Try it every day. Just write it down, how you feeling, what you're avoiding, and it'll also create that awareness for you to actually tackle that issue. But thank you again for coming on. Remember, guys, like, share, subscribe. And until next time, see you guys later.
Thank you.